All right. Um, everybody, I wanna thank you for taking the time to join today. I'm excited for this one because OND is my favorite topic in the beverage alcohol industry. And honestly, not even because it's holiday season, not because it's the biggest quarter of the year, it's because OND tends to expose what's really happening inside of business. A lot of brands can get away with things during slower periods, like weak PDPs, weak life cycle, sometimes weak offers, weak customer experience, retail support. But when OND shows up, all those cracks become visible, and that's what really today's presentation is about. It's not a Black Friday webinar. It's not a holiday marketing checklist. It's really a conversation about how brands can build systems to capture demand and consistently win in OND. Kind of make use best use of your budget. And this is where brands are easiest to discover. It's easiest to understand, easiest to buy, easiest to gift and come back to. And that's because everything has changed. We're talking about AI discovery, consumer behavior has changed, paid media has changed, retail has changed. So I just want to walk through what we're seeing, what's changing, and what the strongest brands are doing a little bit different. All right. So before we jump in, I want to give a little context as to where this presentation is coming from. So I've spent my career in beverage alcohol on the supplier side, e-commerce, direct to consumer, distribution, partnerships, retail support. I've kind of done it all, which is a lot of fun. But one thing that I've learned most about most businesses' problems don't happen in isolation. So people are going to say our ads aren't working, or the e-commerce isn't growing. I've heard that one a ton, or we need more traffic. And sometimes that's true, but the bigger issue is the product page isn't converting, or the offer isn't compelling, or the gifting program doesn't even exist. The life cycle isn't built, the retailer, it's not supported, and the customer experience generally breaks down. And that's why I don't really look at OND through a marketing lens. I try to look at it as an operator. And that's because e-commerce, retail, fulfillment, customer experience, lifestyle, and paid media are all influencing each other at the same time. The brands that understand the connection tend to outperform the brands that don't. All right, so what we're going to learn during this presentation. So here's where we're headed. First, we're going to talk about what's changed because the OND environment today is very different than it was even a couple of years ago. So we're going to talk about what I call the OND demand capture system. And that's really the framework behind everything else in the presentation. We're going to talk about buyers, AI, creative, lifestyle, retail, and then we'll finish with a practical action plan. And the goal is really pretty simple. I want you to leave with ideas you can actually use, not theory, not what buzzwords, just things that are gonna sound, not just things that are going to sound good in a conference room, things that are actually going to work. All right, so let's dive right into why Q4 matters more than ever. Most, hopefully, in this industry know that Q4 matters the most. It's usually about 60% in e-commerce of or it can be up to 60% of your total sales. None of this is new, but what's interesting is why it matters. Most people immediately think revenue, and obviously revenue matters, but it's only part of the story. So what I think is more interesting is that everything O&D creates. So we're talking new customers, relationships, retail opportunities, distributor conversations. My favorite is new data, more data, new demand signals. And a lot of brands look at O&D as the finish line. And I kind of think that's the wrong way to look about it. It could be a launch pad, especially going into new year with all this new signal and data and customers. So the customer who discovers you and your brand in November could and hopefully will still be purchasing from you next summer. And the retailer who sees velocity in December, they might open additional doors for next year, maybe chains, or maybe you'll get in the next set. The distributor who sees demand today, they're probably going to prioritize your brand differently tomorrow, especially during OND. So when I think about OND, I don't think about just the holiday sales. It's everything that you build during that time and everything that comes after. But because the brands that win in OND, they usually create the momentum that gets carried into the next year. All right, so the new OND reality. The rules have kind of changed, and we all know that this industry's been shifting a little bit, and there's been a lot of talk about folks not drinking as much or spending the kind of money they used to. But I think one of the biggest reason this presentation exists is AI discovery became one of the biggest pillars. Product data, it's more important now than ever. I preach this all day, every day to my clients. That's why we use e-commerce to grab data to then use for everything else in our business. Corporate gifting, huge. That got a lot bigger. Retail and e-commerce, they're coming closer together. They're really connected on the back end and a lot of times on the front end. And then first party data, that's more valuable than ever. That's talking about who your customer is, socioeconomic, geo, demo. Consumers are really discovering products in different ways at this point as well. So think about how you shop. You probably didn't start on a brand's homepage. You started with maybe a recommendation, a search, a creator, an email, social media post, maybe and hopefully ChatGPT or the other large language models. And that's exactly what's happening in our industry. No different than anybody else. So discovery has really become fragmented, which means brands need to be ready in more places. And the brands that win aren't necessarily chasing every new tactic. They're building systems that show up wherever demand is created. So the OND demand capture system. So if you remember one thing from today's presentation, I hope it's this one. So because this is really the framework behind everything else, most brands think about campaigns. They think about different systems, how a campaign starts, how it ends, how it compounds. Demand creates customers, customers create data, data creates insights, and then insights improve performance. This is the cycle that I preach to every single one of my clients. Data is king, and how you're going to capture that data is usually the easiest way is going to be through your e-commerce shop. Performance, that creates growth, and then growth creates more demand. So again, full circle, flywheel. So this is what I found is that the strongest brands usually have this system working before OND, and they're not trying to build the plane while they're flying it, especially during the holiday season. They're already prepared, and that's why you can move faster when demand actually spikes. All right, so this is a fun one. The 4 OND buyers. And this is where I think a lot of brands leave money on the table. So because they treat OND like one audience, the holiday shoppers, it isn't. So we're talking about 4 major buyers: the gift buyer, the host, the corporate buyer, the retail shopper, and those people want something completely different. So the gift buyer, they want convenience. The host, they're looking for an experience. Corporate buyer wants reliability, and we're talking about delivery systems at that point. The retail shopper, they're going to want convenience. And the mistake I see all the time, that brands are using the same message for all 4. Same offer, creative, same landing page, same everything. And I get that that's the easiest route, and especially if you're short on budget, that makes a lot of sense. But then you're stuck wondering why conversion suffers, because different buyers require different conversations. And the more relevant you become in the messaging, the easier the conversion gets. All right, next slide. Corporate gifting. So this is one area I think is massively underutilized in our industry. So most brands, they don't really have a gifting strategy. They think they have a gifting idea. Maybe you're going to pair a bottle with glassware and create a VAP. There's a big difference there. So the brands that do this well, they're really treating it like an entire channel. They're building dedicated pages, different tier options, sample programs, different target lists, and then making sure that your fulfillment process is completely ironed out, and then your outreach plans with email and maybe some DMs in the holidays. And they're not just doing it during the holidays, they're doing it months before. So this isn't something that starts in December because Christmas is right around the corner. By then, it's usually too late. So you want to start this work August, September, the latest, have all these systems in place, and then the revenue just kind of shows up later as the year goes on. And that's what's really interesting about the gifting is it often introduces your product to an entirely new customer. So it's not the customer receiving, it's not the end consumer going out there and searching for your product. They're gifted a product. And if it's a nice experience, hopefully they're going to come back. That just creates new revenue. So, and hopefully future demand. So then we start thinking about lifetime value of a customer. So this is a fun one. The death of the homepage. So this is probably the biggest shift happening at the moment. And I always propose this question to a brand, even though the last 6 years have been helping brands get onto e-commerce. And I always ask folks, think about the last time you bought online. Did you start on a homepage? How many times have you been to Maker's Mark website? Maybe never. It's a household name. Everybody's probably had it at one point. But maybe you found your way there through Google, or maybe it was Instagram, or maybe it was TikTok, or sometimes a creator that you're influenced by, a recommendation from a friend, and hopefully, like I said, ChatGPT or the other LLMs. So that's exactly what's starting to happen in our industry. So most brands, they're really not optimizing the homepage while consumers are entering from 10 different directions. Homepage isn't dead. It's just not the front door anymore. And that's important because it changes how we think about the entire customer journey. PDPs, landing pages, your gift guides, your retail locator. That's a thing that a lot of brands overlook. Very important to have on your site. Those are becoming the front doors. So the brands that understand that creating those pillars are creating the better experiences. All right, your product page is now training data. So this slide has become incredibly important over the last year. So your PDP doesn't just sell anymore. It teaches. It teaches Google and Meta and AI. It's training those recommendation engines. Every single image needs to have some meta tagging behind it. Every review, every FAQ, tasting note, every single detail becomes information and data that those platforms are going to pull from. So a strong PDP page really does two things. It converts customers, number one, obviously, and then it helps with discovery with those systems so they understand your product and your brand a little bit more. That's a huge shift. Again, most folks are just thinking of PDP pages as the place where folks buy your product, but you have to start training yourself to think about you're training all these other platforms for discoverability. And that's only going to help with the beginning of a customer journey as well. So the brands that have the strongest PDP pages are often becoming easier to discover than anybody else across all channels. Where are we at? Slide 11. All right. So consumers don't shop channels, they shop occasions. I keep saying every page is fun and important, but they really all are. And this is just another shift that I think that brands need to start paying attention to. So consumers, they don't really shop channels. We're shopping for an occasion. Nobody wakes up and thinks, I need to go buy something from a DTC website. They're more thinking, I need something for Thanksgiving. I need a gift. I need something last minute. So the channel is just really the path. But I think this is where a lot of brands get stuck. They merchandise by product and they market by channel, but consumers are really making decisions based on the moment they're in. So if you're only saying, here's our bourbon or here's our tequila, you're making the customer do more of the work. The stronger approach is, here's the bottle to bring for Thanksgiving, or here's the cocktail kit for hosting. It's a completely different conversation, and it's much easier for the customer to understand why it matters right now. So we really got to think about O&D being filled with moments. And the brands that win, they're the ones that map out their offers, creative, landing pages, and really importantly, emails to those moments. All right, so life cycle. And when I say life cycle, I don't just mean sending more emails. That's what most folks are going to end up thinking. That's where people usually go first. They're like, all right, well, somebody made a purchase. We need to have our email flow. We need more email campaigns. But the life cycle is really, it's a lot bigger than that. This is your relationship with the customer. So that experience has to be, the experience needs to be from the first time somebody discovers your brand all the way to a repeat purchase. So we're talking before, during, after, and needs to be months later as well. So that means a lot of O&D, you're going to get a lot of those customers who maybe have never heard of your brand. Maybe they were gifted. Maybe they were corporate buyers. Maybe they were retail shoppers. Maybe they just visited your site or left a comment on Instagram. But if you don't have those right flows in place, a lot of those people are just become one-time holiday buyers, and that can be a huge miss. So think about a gift buyer. They buy the bottle, but then what? Do they get the tracking information? Do they know when the product is going to arrive? Do they get serving ideas? Did you send them a recipe? Did they get introduced? Does the recipient get introduced to the brand in another way? So with the gifts, you're really talking about two different customers. Do they get an invite to come back? Do they need a nurture sequence? So because the sale isn't the end, yeah, they purchase your products. Great. You have some revenue coming in the door and you have a bottle going out the door. But that's really just the beginning. So it's one of the biggest opportunities I see where brands can really think beyond the transaction. Strongest brands, again, using O&D to acquire customers, but the life cycle of that is going to be really important. And that's where the profitability starts to add up. I've always said Q1 is O&D planning. So the faster that you can get your O&D plans together, and we're talking about the end of this graphic here, January. So I'm talking about Q1. Start planning in Q1. So when you see great O&D program, it's usually pretty obvious. Everything works. Everything is ready. PDP pages, gifting program, email campaigns, the creative, the photography, the retail team knows what's going on. The distributors are on the same plan. Everybody's aligned. And that usually happens for the big houses, but for the crafty players, sometimes it can be piecemealed and kind of building it as you're flying. But the reason why the big brands make it look and feel so much cleaner is because they have been planning for this for months. So what I see more often is brands trying to cram 3 months of prep into 3 weeks. And that's evident from my time over at ExcelPay and Speakeasy, where folks were trying to get onto e-commerce, I don't know, in September, October, when it's not OND anymore. It's SOND. I think we all know that. And if you're just getting those systems set up at that point, you're behind the ball. And if you're doing it at that point, that's where problems can arise. We're talking like inventory or creative or shipping problems or landing page problems. If you don't have all those things squared away before you start doing this stuff, then you could run into some pretty big issues, which might end up turning a customer or two off. So the brands that win really don't wait for the demand to arrive. And you know the demand's going to be there, because of some of the statistics we saw on a couple earlier slides. Prepare for demand, and that's really why this timeline, it matters. So think about your strategy, then move on to September. That's when you're building. October, hopefully launching. November, you're scaling. You're figuring out what worked. December is just optimizing and hopefully converting all of those folks that maybe you touched in October. Then January, you're retaining. You have those folks locked into the life cycle that we just talked about. And the best time to start OND, it's much earlier than you think. That's why I'm always preaching Q1. All right, so the metrics that actually matter. So let's talk about measurement, because this is where a lot of brands accidentally make bad decisions. So most teams are measuring a handful of things like revenue, ROAS, conversion rate, cost of customer acquisition. Those things matter, and I track those things for my clients as well. I'm not saying they don't matter, but they're only part of the picture. So if you're only looking at return on ad spend, you're basically just looking at the rear view mirror. You already know what happened, but I'd be much more interested in what happens next. If an email subscriber, that base is growing, that's valuable. If a retailer clicks on a link, if those are increasing, that's valuable. If gift recipients, they're being captured, valuable. First time buyers entering the funnel, great. We want to see that information. Those are all indicators of future growth. And that's why I like looking at measurements in 3 buckets. So revenue, demand, and future. Revenue obviously tells us what's happening right now. Demand tells us where the opportunity is. And then future tells us whether or not we're building a stronger business. And the best brands will connect all 3. All right. Most brands are solving the wrong problem. And this is probably the slide I believe in the most. I see it all the time. Most brands, they think they have a traffic problem. We need more website visitors, more impressions, more reach. We just need to be a bigger audience. And yeah, that's a great ask and a great want, but think about it. More often than not, it's not the real issue. Yes, more audience and more visitors will eventually generate more revenue, more bottles out the door. But if the PDP page isn't converting, the offer isn't compelling, if the life cycle isn't even built, the customer experience is weak. More traffic just means more people leaving. And that's why I think OND is not a traffic problem. It's a demand capture problem. So kind of going back to the things we said before about how you're being discovered. What does that PDP page look like? What does that landing page look like? What happens when they get there? Because that's where the leverage is. So the strongest brands they're consistently improving upon that and optimizing and scaling on their ability to capture demand, not just generate it. All right. So at this point, none of this should feel, it should be pretty common knowledge. And none of this is a secret. Everyone knows product pages matter and life cycle and AI is becoming important and creative. The challenge isn't just knowing these things, and hopefully you're taking this as a good reinforcement, but the challenge is doing it. And that's where a lot of brands get stuck. Execution is very hard. It's very time consuming. It's easy to make a plan. It's easy to build a deck, but it's much harder to update 40 product description pages and actually build the gifting program and create the life cycle flows within Klaviyo. And that's where some of the brands that actually do those things will separate themselves. Not because they're smarter, more disciplined, it's because they have somebody or they are consistent about their execution. They're preparing earlier, they make fewer excuses, and most of the growth really comes from just doing the fundamentals, not from finding some secret tactic. And that's where my business, Rogue Rye, comes to play. I'm executing on these things for a lot of my clients. So let's talk about AI. Let's remove the hype for a little bit, and because every conference we're hearing about, somebody's talking about AI and all these agents, and every LinkedIn post is talking about it. But most of these conversations stay very high level. And either people think AI is magic or you're getting replaced by it. I don't think either. I think it's just an execution tool. And it really just helps teams move faster. That's where the value is. So audits, content, reporting, analytics, great for idea generation, decision making. I mean, obviously, this deck was a lot of this imagery was built on one of those systems. This image right here looks great. One thing that I will preach a little bit before we kind of dig into what's on this page: don't use AI for all of your content generation. It really discredits your brand, especially if you're looking at, if you have a good piece of content with a professional photographer next to an image that was AI generated. Customers are going to be able to tell. Folks from the younger generation, they're immediately going to tell, and that's going to discredit your brand, and you're gonna have a broken funnel if you're solely relying on AI images. Okay, but for these agents, you can think about building a content calendar, creative concepts, gifting outreach, the email flow campaigns, some design work. You're moving a lot faster to improve, and that's where the opportunity is. It's not replacing people, but having people in the right spots that know how to use this to set up systems that are going to help you move faster in the long run. highly recommend using it. I've been using ChatGPT Pro for the last couple of years, and more than happy to chat offline about some of the best practices there. All right, so creative, and this is one of the biggest shifts in paid media. For years, marketers, we obsessed over targeting, like interest, lookalike, and audience stacks and behavioral segments. And a lot of that worked, but it's really not the game anymore. So creative takes a much bigger role in the performance, but meta still needs signals. Creative has really become one of the most important signals available. So we're talking about offer, hook, visual, messaging, landing page. All of those things will influence performance, like we saw in a couple slides before. And the brands that are consistently trying to solve performance issues by creating new audience doesn't really work. The audience hasn't, the offer hasn't changed, landing page hasn't changed. You just change the audience. If the fundamentals and the structure is broken, it's going to be broken if more people view the site. And once the customer lands on your site and those things are broken, folks will wonder why the results aren't improving. And you can immediately tell most of the time it's not going to be another audience. It's input, signals, better creative. And that's, again, what I'm preaching: the PDP pages and the non-AI content, making sure your content is fundamentally sound and tagged correctly. All right, so if creative really matters that much, what should we actually build? And this is where the matrix comes in. So different buyers, they need different conversions. The gift buyer, they need confidence. Host, probably inspiration. Corporate buyer, like we talked about, needs reliability to make sure those orders get there on time. Retail shopper, they need convenience. And the mistake I see all the time is one message for everybody. Creative, landing pages, same offer. And that's why people wonder why the performance is average. But like we talked about earlier, the strongest brands create relevance and they match the message to the buyer. Again, the buyer to the occasion, and the occasion to the offer. Same product, different conversation. And that's where the conversion really happens. All right. On to what winning creative actually looks like. And again, me preaching, don't use AI imagery, but for this deck, I went all in on it. So it doesn't have to be beautiful, but it needs to be the easiest to understand. And that's one of the biggest misconceptions in marketing. People think great creative means expensive creative. It doesn't. They think it means more flashy. It doesn't. So the best creative is usually simple. Like you can see on this fourth one, utility wins. This is a very, very simple, easy to create piece of creative that is going to perform really well. It's specific, it's relevant, it answers the questions quickly, like what is it, who is it for, why should I care? And if the customer really has to work to understand the message, you've lost them, because attention spans are out the window and very short at this point. But especially during OND, there's a lot of noise, a lot of other brands fighting for the same customers and the same revenue. So I would tie it to a moment, like a need or an occasion or event or a problem. So it's not just a product, because customers don't just buy products. They don't see your bottle and say, oh, I need this particular bottle over the hundreds of other whiskey bottles that I see on the shelf. They buy the brand. They buy solutions to moments they're experiencing. So if you can make it about a moment or a specific need, you're going to have a better connection, and that's the content that really tends to perform better, especially on social. All right, so retail support. This is probably the hill I'm going to die on, because I think our industry has been looking at e-commerce the wrong way for a long time, and people still ask, why should I invest in e-commerce if most of my volume comes through retail? Or how does DTC compete with retail? And that's the wrong conversation. I can't preach this one enough. It's not just a sales channel, it's a demand signal. So think about it. When an order comes in, that order tells a story, because it tells where the customer came from, the attribution. It tells about their demo and geo and socioeconomic and their zip code, and every single zip code from the aggregate data is going to tell a story. Every abandoned cart, that's going to tell a story. So the data becomes proof of demand, and that's where things really get interesting. So imagine sitting across from a distributor, just thinking, what's more powerful? I think customers will buy this, or we've already sold 300 bottles in this market. We've already sold 300 bottles to this particular zip code or this demographic. And we've seen strong retail locator activity. People are looking for retailers on our website, or we built an audience in this zip code. Or you walk into a meeting with a retailer and say, hey, here, instead of saying, try it, do like it, will you buy it? You can show them, here are all the people that purchased in the neighborhoods around here. Here's the top performing SKU. Here's the velocity. Here's the seasonality. Here's the demo, geo, socioeconomic. Here's the threshold of how much they're going to purchase, or average order value. That information is going to go a long way compared to somebody walking in saying, try it, do you like it, will you buy it? I'll throw you a tasting. Show them data. Show your distributors data. Show your investors data. Those are the things that are going to be more important and go further in those conversations, especially if you're trying to get into new chains or get into the reset. Data is king. I know our industry is a little behind it, but that's where I find e-commerce is the most powerful. And that's only going to help your decision-making about the rest of your business. Oh, I thought our customer was going to be this when I created the brand, but when orders actually come in, you see who the customer is. So maybe you need to shift your messaging and your marketing and your budget into a different market or a different platform. Maybe it's Instagram rather than Facebook, or you have a strong signal that you have a lot of customers in Florida. You're not there yet with distribution. Maybe we need to start looking into what distributors will carry our product in Florida because we clearly have a lot of data coming from that area. It's my favorite. Clearly, I'm passionate about it. I love when brands get on e-commerce and yes, make a bunch of money from their shop, but aggregating the data and figuring out what's next is my favorite. So what winning brands are doing differently, and I've worked with a lot of brands over the years, and I've noticed something. It's the brands that are consistently consistent. They're going to win most, rather than the brands that are doing the most radical. They're either just doing a handful of things better or earlier, and that's really about it. It's not about being flashy and big promotions. It's about consistency and the fundamentals and preparing patterns. So what patterns do we keep seeing? Winning brands start earlier. Obviously, a lot of brands will wait. Winning brands will prepare. And the second thing is systems. Winning brands don't think about campaigns first, they think about systems first. So how does the offer connect to the PDP page? How does the PDP page connect to the life cycle? How does the life cycle connect to the retention? And how does the retention support retail? So everything is connected. And one of the other things I see is customer value. Winning brands don't obsess over transactions. They obsess over the relationships. How do we get that second purchase from the customer? How do we get that third purchase? Because customer value compounds, and they also tend to be much more relevant. So the brands usually have their message tied to occasions, like we talked about at nauseum at this point. Creative is tied to buyers, and these offers are tied to specific needs. And then finally, these brands are using data better, not because they have more data, because everybody has data, but the difference is actually how you use it, how you learn from it, how you adapt from it, how you apply it. And that's where the advantage usually comes from. It's not budget, scale. It's not luck, even though you need a lot of luck in this business. It's preparations, systems, and consistent evaluation. So here's a little OND readiness scorecard I put together, and it's one of the most practical things in the deck. So at the end of the day, every brand is different, but the opportunity for one brand might be gifting, where another could be life cycle, and another could be PDP page optimization. So like all scorecards, they kind of force honesty. So I worked with a lot of brands that have had incredible products and weak life cycle, and then on the opposite, great life cycle and fundamentals, but the juice wasn't quite there. So you have to have a nice combination of both. And then brands that had strong e-commerce but no gifting strategy or no retail strategy. Nobody's perfect. That's not the goal, but the goal is to identify where the biggest opportunities exist. So I encourage everyone to score yourself honestly. Offers, PDP, email, SMS, corporate gifting, retail support, AI, creative. Where are you getting stuck? Where is the demand escaping? Where are customers getting stuck? Where's the friction? And those answers are usually worth more than the score itself. Because once you know where the biggest gap is, you know where to focus first, and that's where growth typically starts. So when I wrote this the other day, I got scared. Seeing that number 2030, man, it makes me feel old, but that's just wild to think about. But where it's approaching fast. So zoom out for a second. It's not really about OND. OND is more the pressure test. It's where the weaknesses show up and where the opportunities show up and where the system gets exposed. But the bigger question is, where is beverage alcohol actually headed? And when I look at the industry, I think we're in the middle of a pretty significant transition. Consumers changing, discovery is changing, technology, commerce is changing. Obviously, millennials are not drinking as much, and there's a couple different verticals that are showing promise, like the THC or wellness brands. But the brands that win over the next decade, they're probably going to look a lot different than they do the brands that won decades past. So historically, the model has been really straightforward: build a brand, get distribution, support the market, hope the velocity is there. Distributors were typically your salespeople, and that worked for a while. And it's usually those that have grew up in that system and had success in that system are the ones that preach that e-commerce and doesn't work and you don't need this stuff. But consumers they really have a lot of choices. There's a lot of noise out there. They're discovering products completely differently than they were years ago. I mean, you have shopping capability in your hands. And the brands that win in 2030, they're going to have stronger customer relationships, stronger lifestyle, gifting programs, discoverability, intelligence, data. They're not going to look, it's not going to be isolated channels, but it's going to be a connected ecosystem. And honestly, most of this isn't 10 years away. No, not 10 years. It's already happening. It's happening now, and the brands that are taking advantage of it are going to be the ones that win both in OND and for the next couple of years. So the next competitive advantage isn't more media, it's better systems. We already talked about it ad nauseum, but again, better life cycle, better PDP. All right, so I know we're coming up on time, but I want to come up with a 30-day action plan. So look at your inventory, look at your gifting, look at your creative, look what's actually happening today in week 1. Week 2, build, landing pages, offers, lifecycle flows, retail support materials. Week 3, launch, turn these things on, start testing, activate campaigns, begin your outreach, really get the system moving. And then week 4, optimize. So look at the data, kill what's not working, and then double down on what is, and find those leaks, improve the system, and then repeat. The brands that start now are going to be in a much better position. That's one of the things that you've heard me say 100 times during this presentation, but I can't beat you over the head with it enough. OND is a very significant revenue generator, and you should be prepping and getting those systems in place now before it's too late. All right, the 7 takeaways. Discovery, completely changed. Consumers shop for occasions. So we're thinking about moments. PDP pages are more important than ever, again, because it's training all of those other systems for discoverability. Corporate gifting can be completely underutilized. There's so much money to be made there, and so many more clients and potential customers that you can get from just putting together that kind of program. Life cycle discoverability drives profitability, or life cycle drives profitability, not discoverability. AI will accelerate your execution, and then start earlier, start before anybody else. And with that, Q&A. I will leave it up to you guys. If you want to drop something in the chat, or if you want to reach out to me on an email afterwards, more than happy to talk about what Rogue Rye does. It's mostly about execution on a lot of that we talked about today, aggregating data, analyzing, optimizing. I started my company as more of a strategist for e-commerce, using the data to figure out how to help your brand scale, but quickly turned into a full service marketing agency, taking care of the social media and building websites and producing commercials, all the above. It's a lot of fun. Waiting for a couple questions. Oh, I didn't even see all these. OND, yes, OND is October, November, December. All right, well, with that, I think I'm going to conclude it. I want to thank everybody for joining, and really appreciate SIP for the invite. spirits industry professionals. It's a great resource and great community that we're all just here to share some ideas and build each other up, because rising tides raise all ships. I know we're in competition with each other, but there's no reason why we can't share different tactics that work. And if you need help executing on those tactics, feel free to reach out to me, Brandon at tryrogueandrye.com. All right, guys, I appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day.